Hi, welcome to Comics Chat. I'm Sarah Cook. I'm here with artist and creator James Burton, who has a really exciting campaign going on right now for Damage Inc. 1 and 2. Do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Damaging started off being a story about these five friends who bonded together and formed a club to hunt down supernatural creatures and superpowered meta-humans for bounties. And it was a lot of fun to do like that. They're always basically going to plan B and causing explosions. Over time, though, as my writing matured, it changed a little bit. So now the characters have changed a little bit where um uh, there's a little sister in the book that kind of got herself involved in the club, and her name is Sarah. Right now the story that we're doing inside of that Kickstarter is we're going to be exploring her backstory, some of the trauma that she's been through, and how it's going to affect the outcome of what's going on with the group and the dynamic against some of the villains they come across and things like that.
That's really interesting. Kind of talking about how your writing has evolved. I feel like I've kind of had a similar experience with my series No Spell Lasts Forever, that I kind of wrote all 6 issues at once. But we're only up to issue number 3, actually kickstarting it. And I feel like I'm going back and kind of reworking some of these later issues as my writing evolves too. It's an interesting process.
It is, especially when one of the characters gets inside of your head
Yeah.
and starts like being more involved. That's what happened with that. Like, the little sister character is literally based on my younger sister. Her name is
Oh.
Kira, and she is every little sister is a pain in the bottom to the older sibling. There's no difference with her. But I'm also really proud of her because she's got her own traumas, her own experiences that we use a lot of things based on with Sarah, and she's had to overcome a lot of things. I've got 2 kids, and when they were born, she was going through a lot of things trying to make adjustments in her life, and for her to be around them, she really had to get a lot more balance than she had, and she
Yeah.
was brave enough to seek a lot of help.
Wow.
So we're using some of that as inspiration with, Sarah, and we're gonna kind of explore it in the rest of this while fighting an army of goblins and a bunch of other stuff.
Wow, that's so cool. I love when you have those kind of just experiences in your own life that can kind of add depth to your characters.
After you get through them, yeah, that's depth to your characters. While
Yeah.
you're going through it, not so much.
Yeah. That's interesting too, because I've kind of learned that I think trying to write about something as you're experiencing it is just too hard. And it never, like, the writing is never good. At least for me.
Yeah, it gets all angsty.
Yeah, definitely gets pretty angsty. Um, but that was another thing too that I saw on the Kickstarter page for it that I liked a lot. You've got Sarah, and then on the page you mentioned that kind of this group of main characters are based in some ways on some of the found family that you had at different points in your life.
Yeah, Kira and I were raised in a house that was chaotic and unstable. Best way for me to phrase it is that my dad was an independent pharmacist, and a meth cook. And my mom was, the politest way to put it, like a she had her own complications, and she was also a pill addict and some other
Wow.
things. Made for a very complicated house, but getting through that, what happens is a lot of kids who are going through those traumas, if they're not finding that stable version of their family, they start looking for other ways to have that influence in
Mhm.
their lives. And everybody's is a little bit different. With mine, I kind of like started building a family out of a group of friends through
Mhm.
role playing games,
Wow,
through D and
that's very
D,
cool.
Dungeons and Dragons, Palladium, and in a lot of those games, eventually we made this thing called Damage Inc., which was a story about, just like I said, it, a group of friends that are trying
Wow.
to go out and collect bounty. That literally was the premise of those games when I was, 14, 15 years old. And
Wow.
I had a little sister that really wanted to play and kept driving us nutty. All those things are directly from those experiences, and then they're tweaked, of course, with how authors, creators want to
Mhm.
change things here or there. Um,
Yeah.
for example, there's a character in there named Gage. He's very entertaining. uh,
Mhm.
because he's always trying to be aggravating because he wants the attention from the villains to be forced on him.
Mhm.
He doesn't act like he has a big heart, but he actually does. He's trying to
Yeah.
get hurt so other people don't.
Oh.
But his sense of humor is misogynistic and he's a jerk.
Mhm.
So as I was writing the books, I really intended it just to be like this crazy supernatural superhero thing. And that's really not what it turned into. I
Mhm.
started interacting with like Jason Doobie's Shadowhunters, which are all girls, or bringing in the character of Sarah, and
Mhm.
these characters ended up being foils for his stupidity.
Mm. Oh, I
Like,
love that.
and I it just kind of naturally progressed that way,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of happy it did because it really gives both his character and their characters a little bit more depth to them. Like he's always trying to, like he'll mansplain stuff to them, and they'll end up yelling at him, or he'll try to tell somebody they can't do something, and he'll try to get in front of them.
Mhm.
He's like I said, he's doing it for a reason, but that doesn't mean that reason's okay to the other characters. So they end up like kicking
Yeah.
him in the balls or throwing him through a window or whatever makes
Nice.
me laugh when I do it to to this avatar of my friend.
Nice. So it sounds like it's, kind of evolved into a pretty personal project.
It has. I think that when you're doing any project of love, and all
Mm.
independent comics have to be a project of love, because
Yeah.
if you don't, you're not going to finish the marathon. I mean, the
Yeah.
hours it takes to do the book, the ridiculous hours it takes to promote it so people will see it and buy it.
Yeah.
Um, you really have to love what you're creating, and it has to mean something to you more than just, hey, I made a book.
Yeah.
um, or here is my version of Batman, or all the other
Yeah.
different um, issues that sometimes people run into when they're trying to create. And
Yeah.
the more you love it, the more time you spend on it, the more open you are to it evolving, ends
Mhm.
up changing your own experience with it. And
Yeah.
that's what's happened for me. I've been able to take something that was kind of just these silly adventures that made me laugh, and I've turned it into some things that have allowed me to understand other people in my life and that have allowed me to like share some of those understandings.
Yeah. It's so interesting, and I feel like I've had a similar experience with another series that I haven't found an artist for or moved forward with actually producing yet, but hopefully in the not too distant future. Um, but I had the original kind of draft written of it, and I went through a couple rounds of editing with it and thought that I was happy with it. And that was like back in the fall when I finished that. And then but it sticks with you. It's like you said, like these characters kind of get into you. Um, and I just kind of like I was thinking I think there's too much. There are all of these things that I like elements that I have into it in it that are cool, but not really like adding value and are kind of like I think detracting in some way. And so I kind of cut those back and made it a shorter version of the story, and kind of doing that I think helped me focus on, what is it that this character is really experiencing. And I had this kind of feeling that some of the stuff that I have experienced shows up in this character. And I think just this process of like trimming and refining kind of helped me get clear on like, well, why is it that I relate to this character so much? And what is it like of me that's really in her? And it really changed my experience with the story too.
Yeah, and those are great questions to ask as you're
Mhm.
developing yourself and developing the story through the project.
Yeah.
Right now, this story that I've released, it's supposed to be about one of four pieces.
Mhm.
Um, the pieces in the future are outlined, but we're still working there. We're kind of in that same spot where first we included all these cool things we thought would be neat. Now we're pulling back, trimming, refocusing. It's a really similar
Yeah.
process
Hmm.
that as what I'm going through with Jeff Aragon. He is the person that is writing Damage along with me at the moment.
Hmm.
I'm really enjoying working with him, but I've always had trouble working with other writers for the last few years. There's a couple that I have and I've had good experiences with. There was one creative partner I had that kind of that what you just described really wasn't his process. He really had his own way of going about it, and it didn't
Hmm.
mesh well with mine. And there were different problems, and working through it became a little bit too much to bear.
Yeah.
Um, so sometimes if you're not both on that same page, especially with a creative partner,
Mhm.
things tend to bog down and not go quite right.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but when you
Mhm.
are in that same spot, like what you just described,
Mhm.
um, there is an opportunity for that personal growth and for the character growth if you let it happen,
Yeah.
and it's a really good opportunity to give your project weight in a
Yeah.
way that you like, for example, a lot of Hollywood movies right now are kind of missing all that, and
Yeah.
and then there's all these people putting all this money in it, wondering, "I wonder why this thing that we've copied 90 times isn't working
Yeah.
anymore."
Mhm.
And you can only
Exactly.
photocopy a piece of art so long until it,
Yeah.
kinda gets messed up.
Yeah. Agreed. Um, well, yeah, if you're ready, do you want to go ahead and jump on into the comic you wanted to chat about? Oh, and also the
Sure.
link to the Kickstarter will be in the show notes, and everyone
Awesome.
should go check it out.
I appreciate that. Anybody who's willing to share and back that, we're at 62% and any momentum is very appreciated. I thank you for sharing that.
Oh, no problem. It's an exciting campaign.
Thank you.
Yes, you want to jump on into the comic that you wanted to chat about is The Crow.
Yes, ma'am. And what I'm specifically referring to is there's been other sequels to The Crow.
Hmm.
There's been other things written along similar lines. There's novels by Poppy Z. Bright. There are renditions even in manga where they've gotten different versions of it, just like they've had sequels to the movie. But
Hmm.
I'm talking about the very original story
Yeah.
by James O'Barr. Yeah,
Hmm.
James O'Barr is for me, the book has a lot more gravitas for me personally because it kind of showed up in my life at a time when I was trying to figure out what type of artist I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to tell stories.
Hmm.
I knew I love comics, but the style I have, like you saw it on Damage, I don't draw like a house style. I'm not Jim Lee,
Hmm.
um, which at the time everybody was paying Jim Lee clones
Yeah.
to make books in
Hmm.
that time, like 92, 93. Um, and I needed to find my own voice, my own path, and
Hmm.
did not have much guidance on that. And then I was at a comic shop with a really close friend. We were looking around, and I just happened to find a graphic novel of The Crow, which is actually
Oh.
put away at the moment because I got James O'Barr's signature on it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, but it's raggedy. It is beat the hell up. I have read this book so many times. I've memorized it. The art and everything inside of it means a lot to me. Because when I opened it up, I saw this visceral, visceral, dark,
Yeah.
really emotional artwork that was not perfect.
Hmm.
It's like when you hear classical music and somebody's playing a guitar. Okay, that's a guitar sound,
Hmm.
but rock and roll gets played through an amp with distortion,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, that's a good description.
and that's what the crow is like. It's
Hmm.
distortion in this angry way that really identified with me at the time. I was a really angry kid with that background that I just described.
Hmm.
So I opened it and I see this violence that's almost written and depicted like a poem, and I
Yeah.
see all of this emotion behind it.
Hmm.
It wasn't just, two characters fighting over a city and knocking down walls and just smacking each other across a desert or any of the other things I'd seen. It
Hmm.
really was like, no, I am fighting you to the death because you have taken something from me and I am taking it back in the only way I can.
Hmm. Yeah.
Very visceral.
Yeah, I think visceral is the right word. And I think that's what really strikes me about it too, that it's just the dark emotionality of it. Um, and I love stuff like that. Like, I mean, Sandman is my favorite comic, and like my favorite Batman is like Long Halloween or something like that. And that kind of like dark, like moody, kind of comic. I love stuff like that.
Oh, Long Halloween had a great atmosphere. It
Yeah.
really like the storytelling in Long Halloween. I enjoyed that too because it wasn't just a cackling villain. It really was. I mean, there were moments like that. Um, but you get this presence of atmosphere inside of the environment,
Yeah.
like the environment's a character.
Mhm. It's funny you said that because I actually just recently was talking about it on Instagram, and I said the same thing. It's just it's so atmospheric that because this mystery stretches out over a number of months, and so there's this kind of air of like, then when's the next shoe gonna fall?
Mm.
And it gives it this kind of like moodiness and creepiness and like sense of impending doom.
Yeah, it's also nice to see that Batman didn't figure it out in,
Yeah.
20 pages
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like there is that kind of like moodiness in The Crow too. And what you're saying about the artwork is really interesting. I think the style of art really fits it. If it were a more like a tighter art style, it wouldn't fit it. It has to be, a little loose, a little emotional.
Yeah, I don't know if you know the background as to what happened with James O'Barr is that he had lost, he had a teenage love like we all do, and he was walking home with her and she was literally killed by a drunk driver in front of him.
Wow.
And his processing his grief was a huge part of that book.
Hmm.
He went into the military. He was doing martial arts manuals for the military and making the crow at the same time. And he has
Yes.
materials. He had things like, those dollar store watercolor kits,
Mm-hmm.
things that
Yeah.
like no self-respecting artist would be like, I'm not touching that. Look at that brush. Oh my God. Those things are garbage. And yet that's the kind of stuff he used to make that when that's what he had. There are some images in there where he's depicting like his love for pardon me, Eric, the main character, his love for the woman he lost, Shelley,
Hmm.
and he's trying to echo that love that he was feeling inside,
Hmm.
right?
Wow.
And so we've got these
Yeah.
beautiful inked watercolors amidst these hard inked, visceral fight parts
Yeah.
of the comic. They're a
Hmm.
huge, comparison, a huge difference. But it is
Yeah.
amazing to know that he made those watercolors with those crappy watercolor kits.
Wow.
It's very intimidating. I don't the ability to pull that off is impressive.
Yeah, it really is, and it's, I mean, those scenes where it's just Eric and Shelley are really beautiful
Yeah,
and like just soft and, um, yeah, like just warm and loving and such a contrast to everything else that's going on around them. Um, and that's really interesting to know. It was probably like a Crayola, like watercolor set or something. That's super interesting.
yeah, that man poured his heart and soul out in that thing.
Yeah, and
Um,
it comes through.
it does, and I think that's the element of art where the value in artistic expression comes from exposing those emotions
Yeah.
for me.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I don't always feel it when I'm looking at some of the storytelling or
Mhm.
some of the projects that are out there. You do see it. You
Mhm.
do absolutely see it in other projects. You can tell how much somebody loves something like Sam Keith's original stuff with the Max, like the first 12 issues or so. You could see how much he would love doing it. But
Mhm.
later on, as everybody is trying to get their work out and trying to get their issues out and confronting deadlines and the rest of that, uh, you know, art doesn't always get to keep up when people are under those kinds of deadlines.
Mhm.
Comics are a tough
Yeah.
medium.
Mhm.
That's why so many companies, when they have an art team, even if that art team is popular, they're rotating art teams, and you might get 3 or 4 issues, and then the next 3 or 4 issues are somebody else.
Yeah.
It's to stop those delays that happen in indie comics. There's
Mhm.
a lot of indie projects that get delayed for a long time, uh,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's for good reasons, sometimes it's not, and that's one of the ways that they do to get around it. But it really does break that emotional connection sometimes
Yeah.
when you're skipping into somebody who maybe doesn't have that passion or
Mhm.
maybe isn't ready to express that or hasn't developed a voice or maybe they're only doing it for the job and you can tell it. But when you pick up the crow, you can literally tell that if you could use pain as a medium, like
Mhm.
that
Yeah,
that that if it was a color,
I
if it
love
was a
that.
paint or an ink, that's how those pages would be covered. They'd be covered
Yeah.
with what he was
Mm,
going through.
I love that. Yeah. If pain or a medium, that's accurate for the crow. Um, and I completely agree. I mean, I think this is part of the conversation that I've been having with people about like AI art, because aside from the fact that it's horrible because it steals art from actual artists, I think it's horrible because it's just a misunderstanding of kind of the entire point of art. And it's supposed to be human expression, and it's supposed to be, a real authentic expression of emotion and human experience. Um, and that's why we do it. That's why we're in it.
You
So what's the
know,
point? If you're going to take that out of it, then it's just empty. And what's the point of that?
unfortunately, for the people who invested in it, the people who are using it,
Hmm.
I would say the point of it is profit.
Yeah,
To give you an
unfortunately.
example, I am extraordinarily, to make it very clear, um, I make T-shirts that actually say "fuck AI,"
Nice.
the label underneath it. I have a very strong feeling about this particular subject. Um, AI is supposed to be a tool that is supposed to raise human life up. That's what it's supposed to
Mhm.
be. And what we're seeing it being used for, what's the first thing as it's getting released to use? To make memes. And then what's the second thing it's being used for? It's being used by people who are too lazy to gain the skill
Yeah.
to depict what they want to depict, to
Hmm.
steal everybody else's work,
Yeah.
merge it together, which there are similarities between that and what goes on in the human brain. But they're literally doing it because they don't want to take the time and effort to invest in what they're doing. That's like a metaphor for everything that's wrong with
Yeah.
capitalism
It's true.
and
I
everything
agree.
that's wrong with like the
Hmm.
basically about being human, that avarice that is our flaw.
Yeah.
It's all summed up in what we're using it for already.
Yeah.
uh,
We just end up hurting ourselves.
in a lot of way. I mean, art's supposed to help you
Mhm.
process. How can you
Yeah.
process if you just write 10 different things into a thing and then tell it to make pictures of a hot chick in a Superman costume? It just
Yeah. Exactly.
I, it's bewildering to me. But if human beings made sense to me all the time, I probably wouldn't be an artist in the first place.
Yeah. I think that's true. Same.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have an idea for a comic that I haven't outlined or anything. It's just a vague idea, but in the future where AI has it's done the opposite of what we intended it for it to do, and kind of taken over all of the like art making and all of the good things, and then we're left with kind of nothing
Yeah.
because we've done it to ourselves.
I being left without a way or a reason to express yourself, I find bewildering. And
Hmm.
I'm afraid I'll give you an example. I am a cancer survivor. In
Oh wow.
2007, I had stage 4 cancer. I was not
Wow.
supposed to survive
Hmm.
um, at all. When I
Hmm.
was dying and on my deathbed, I didn't really think about how much money I'd made. I thought about the people I was going to miss. I thought about
Yeah.
my daughter who had just been born, not knowing me,
Wow.
and things like that. And I needed ways to like let some of that out.
Hmm.
It shows up in Damage, where the main character, Angry Brain, he's also a cancer survivor, and he's trying to make sense of it. And some of the stories, he's really angry about things and trying to like make sense of it because
Yeah.
it isn't something that just makes sense. Life isn't
Hmm.
so simple that we can just let it go for one thing or try to figure out it from a different angle. It's just not that simple for everybody,
Yeah.
you know?
Hmm.
And you need ways to talk about it, express it. And you know, group therapy and things like that aren't always the right place for some people.
Hmm.
For me, I'd go in there at stage 4 and hear somebody about stage 1 who aren't even going to have to do
Wow.
surgery, complaining
Ugh.
and literally crying about the effect it's had on their lives.
Mhm.
I'm sorry, I don't have the patience for that, and I end up, like,
Mhm.
getting angry and stuff, and it's you know, instead I pour that out into the books that I make.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's what art is, because life is this messy, kind of complicated experience, and art is like an attempt to navigate it in some way.
It definitely is. I don't have too many healthy coping mechanisms. I don't. The house I grew up in, the coping mechanisms usually involved either physical violence or a lot of smack talk,
Wow.
some type of verbal abuse, but it ranged in its levels. Um, the only healthy thing that I learned through all of that was to pour my feelings into the art that I was making, the stories I was making.
Mhm,
And I think that is part of what gravitated me towards The Crow so much, is it was so
mhm.
obvious to me
Yeah,
that somebody was letting it all out. And
yeah.
it was such a well done version of that expression
Mhm.
that it just it told me that I didn't have to be the clone that all the
Yeah.
that everybody loved. It told me I
Mhm,
didn't have to learn a house style, that there's more than one path, and it represented a different type of validity for my
mhm,
existence. Um, it just connected to me in that way. Those older black and white books just carry a different kind of emotion than
mhm.
things that are really polished up. It doesn't mean the polished up stuff isn't beautiful. Like
Yeah.
over there, I'm in my garage, and over in this corner, I've got two motorcycles. One of them is a
Mhm.
very beat up old machine that I love, but it doesn't work right.
Yeah.
And I tinker on that thing all the time, and I can never get it running more than 4 or 5 days in a row. And then right next to it is a fuel injected motorcycle that I never have to work on. That is always working. They're both beautiful in their own ways.
Mhm. Yeah, and and I think anytime you can kind of, I don't know, appreciate that or like realize that you can find your own style and it doesn't have to be a particular way because different styles have their benefits and have different ways of expressing things and you can find that avenue that's kind of right for you.
Yeah. Um, the trick is, though, in today's world, if you are trying to further the art that you're trying to do, make more of it and the rest of it, you can do it for yourself. But if you're trying to branch it out and make money so you can make more of it, the real
Mhm.
trick is finding other people that connect with that as well.
Mhm.
And that's not always as easy. The more niche down it becomes,
Mhm.
the more difficult it can be to find people. Well,
Yeah.
there, and not there is also not room for everybody to be loved at the level that the top 2% get loved,
Yeah.
because each
Mhm.
crowd's got its own shape, its own form, its own reality. So
Yeah.
there's all kinds of different nuances. But when you do find the stuff that you're happy with and you're able to generate more of it,
Mhm.
that's where that sweet spot is. And that's where I
Yeah.
think most creators are looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's not easy. Especially because it is such a collaborative medium and then finding the people you to collaborate with who are kind of on the same wavelength, but then also finding your audience who's on the same wavelength, but then making sure that you're kind of on the same wavelength yourself with these people you want to be working with. It's kind of a lot of moving pieces.
It is, but you know what? If it wasn't so, I mean, there's a lot of evolution in what you just said, and there's a
Yeah.
value in growing through that whole process. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
and I think that value holds a lot of weight.
Hmm.
Like the other book you and I had discussed, possibly discussing today, was a book with the title Poison Elves.
Hmm.
That author really did find his group and was
Yeah.
able to do a lot with with the group itself because it became really loyal.
Hmm.
And that's like an example of somebody who was able to take that kind of turn and really build on it.
Yeah.
I think James O'Barr is an even better example of that because he was able to do that all the way to the point where it became those films, it became the other
Yeah.
offshoot stories. Other creators wanted to be a part of it and do their own version. I
Hmm.
mean, all those homages are. whether they're good or not. Let's admit some of those Crow movies are really bad. Um, but all those homages are a testament to how well he was able to touch that emotional core for so many people.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true because it's not an obvious a choice that so many people would necessarily jump on board. It's not like everyone wants to make, I don't know, a Batman movie or whatever it is. And The Crow is not something where it's obvious where you'd read it and say, like, this is going to be like a movie and all of these spinoffs and all of these things. Um, but I think it's just something that's so like just emotionally honest that it was able to excite people in that way.
And that's a great point. Emotionally honest, authentic.
Mhm. Yeah.
That authenticity, it gets missed by people who are really trying to like, for example, who are trying to pick a genre and write to it instead of, finding that inspiration and basing it. Both of them
Mhm.
have their success in their different ways, but that authenticity is much more difficult to come by when you are trying to write to what's popular.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, that's something that I've been thinking about too, just with my own writing, because I have the stories that I'm like actually writing right now. Then I have all of these kind of rough outlines um, for stories that I want to kind of outline in more detail and that I want to put like pitch documents together for. And I was kind of going through this period like back in the winter, and it's still winter, but back in the earlier winter, fall and winter. Um, where I was kind of going through my notebooks and like doing some rough outlines of some of these ideas and trying to figure out like, well, which one would be the best to pitch? Like, which one is going to sound the most exciting to people? And it's not that you don't have to think about that at all, but I think I got to a place with it where I was just going in circles. And every time I would try to outline one of these ideas, like all I could see is like, well, no, this is why like a publisher isn't going to like it. Or this is why it's like too close to something else for me to like pitch. And I wasn't happy with any of them, so I had to just kind of, like, step back and say, like, "Well, what am I actually the most excited about writing? Like, what do I wanna be writing?" And do that one,
Yeah.
because that's gonna be the most authentic, and that's gonna be the one that I do the best job with writing, and I think, like, ultimately, the one that, like, if anything is gonna be picked up by a publisher, it would be that one.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. You have to be excited about a project. You have to be
Yeah.
emotionally connected to it to be authentic, and that lack of
Mhm.
authenticity is really easy to source out on other
Yeah.
people, and without that
Mhm.
connection, uh, how are you supposed to get people behind you if you're not even behind it in the first place? So
Yeah.
it's
Mhm.
definitely a good process thought that you're going through
Yeah.
with it, and sometimes that's how you find out this may have been a good idea at the moment.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I think we've all got that. I think somewhere I have like a pig ninja in one of my drawing books or some little things like that where they didn't hit the mark and they just became a sketch.
Mhm. Yeah, I've definitely had that, and I think with a couple of these ideas, I'm like, "Well, there's, like, I don't know, maybe something interesting here for, like, a short, but this is not a series."
Yeah, and sometimes writing through that process is a lot of fun and you get those juices out and you can then move
Mhm.
on too. There's lots of
Yeah,
different aspects about that being healthy.
yeah, I agree. It's writing is a process in a
Oh,
lot of
definitely.
ways, and I think it's, through the process of doing all of that, you can kind of process some of your own stuff too.
So let me turn the table on you for a second. What is the project that you're most excited and putting all of your passion into at the moment?
I think I'm excited about No Spell. And I have the Kickstarter for number 3 for that coming up later in the spring. Um, I'm also really excited about there's another one that I'm writing that I'm on this first draft of the second issue.
Mm.
It's a sci-fi, and it's about these 2 siblings who live on a space station, and, the space station is old and run down and kind of about to be decommissioned, and they're trying to
Huh.
save it. But it's also really about, like, the main character. They grew up there with their dad who recently passed away, and her kind of motivation is to hold on to this sort of last piece of him. And I think there's a lot of my own experience with, my own grief that has gone into this one. So it feels pretty personal, and I'm excited about that one. And then the
Yeah,
other one is,
I
oh,
like
sorry.
those. No, I was just gonna say I like how you're even talking about it.
Hmm.
There's stuff there to connect to. I dig it.
Oh, thanks. It's called right now. It's called Mayfly, but that might change.
Titles
um,
are subject to change.
yeah, yeah. I think I obsess over titles too much sometimes, but
It's part of the fun.
it is. And then I'm also working on sort of reworking that other one and making a shorter, kind of tighter version of it, which is kind of like an urban fantasy horror. Um,
My favorite subject.
yeah. That's mine too. Mayfly is a sci-fi, but I generally, in writing at least, gravitate more towards kind of urban fantasy, supernatural stuff.
I didn't even realize that that was my favorite subject matter until I noticed that most of my books were that. At first, I was like, I'm a
Mhm.
superhero guy, and then you know, oh, I'm not writing any superhero books.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm a superhero guy, why am I doing that?
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know. I just gravitated towards that subject, so I get that. It's a lot more. I don't know. It just feels more grounded for me, even though it's ridiculous. Having some three-headed dog chasing somebody down a modern freeway
Hmm.
who's trying to get away on a motorcycle or any crazy stuff like that. It's not really grounded, but it feels grounded. I can pretend it is.
Yes. There's something about like magic and like supernatural creatures. And I don't know if it's because they're so mysterious and they kind of like lurk in the shadows and stuff that you feel like it could be in the real world and you're just not seeing it right now because they're like out there hiding in the shadows somewhere. So that's
Maybe.
how it feels to me.
Yeah. That we're all just one piece of mail away from the wizarding world. So
Yeah, exactly. Um, so yeah, was there anything else about The Crow or anything else that you wanted to chat about? Any
well,
feelings about the movie?
I did love the original movie. We went and
Hmm.
cried. Several of us crammed in the back of a pickup truck back when that wasn't illegal, and then went and saw that right when it came out. The the thing about the Crow I don't think we touched on is that it's like when he's retelling the why he loves Shelley so much, you get a sample of a love story,
Hmm.
in there. And a lot of time in comic books in that particular medium, you get the bug hunt, which
Hmm.
is, where somebody's hunting for revenge. That's a really common style of storytelling. In Slice of Life, you get, different types of love stories. Some of them get
Hmm.
really dramatic than others. When The Crow was made, though, not a lot of people were combining those things. You know,
Yeah, that's true. Hmm.
Slice of Life has an even bigger presence now because of all the influence in manga. But in the early '90s, when he was writing it and when it was getting released, that wasn't exactly a common trope. There's, I
Yeah.
think, maybe two or three other indie books out there that were do even just touching on slice of life or love or whatever.
Hmm.
Uh, and he did a really amazing job of being able to show that alongside of all that violence.
Yeah.
Um, I know we mentioned the artistic style of it, but
Hmm.
also just the exposing of how intense he felt about that person. That wasn't very common back then, and I don't
Yeah.
think that even now, even though maybe the subject is more common, the intensity of it
Yeah.
isn't. And
Yeah.
that part I think also needs to be mentioned. Like if you read Image did their own rerun of The Crow where they reproduced it, new artists, new
Hmm.
whatever, James O'Barr's Blessing. And I remember reading the foreword, the very first page of it, where Todd McFarlane
Hmm.
was talking about it and some of the other stuff. And it kind of started off as this is the greatest love story ever told.
Oh,
Like
wow.
that's
Hmm.
that's how he phrased it. And there's a lot of people who get into that stuck mind and mentality where it's like, "Oh, I would die for her," and all that ego feeling, right? And
Mhm.
those feelings are valid, but you really understand in the original work that, yes, obviously he'd die for her because he did. But
Mhm.
but he was also living for her.
Yeah. Mhm.
And my dad used to have this tattoo on his arm. My sister, who is on Sarah, she has a tattoo on the back of her neck. It says, "I live and I die for those who I love."
Oh,
But the important part about that is not that somebody's willing to die for the people they care about. The live part's supposed to come
yeah.
first,
Mhm.
and it's a more valuable part of that experience.
Mm.
It takes a long time to be mature enough to understand that.
Yeah.
It and he did a great job of illustrating both sides of that coin
Mhm.
in
Yeah.
that messy, complicated way.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think, no, I think the intensity of those scenes with Shelley, like, makes her feel real too. Um, because I feel like in a story like this, it would be easy to just kind of make her a plot device. Like you
Was
look at
she
like John Wick or something, and I love the John Wick movies. I don't want to be too critical of them, but the one thing that does kind of bug me about them a little bit, um, is that his wife is not real. She's never fleshed out like at all, and it is just kind of a plot device for his story. And Shelley doesn't feel like that. She feels like a real person, and you feel like his feelings for her are real, and his feelings also aren't just a plot device, but real and authentic.
I would describe it. Look, man pain is a complicated topic. Okay,
Yeah.
making stories about a guy out for revenge, like I said, it's a super common trope, right? And there's a lot of
Mhm.
people who identify with it. But it's a double-bladed sword, like you're talking about. If 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 the story isn't three-dimensional, it kind of
Mhm.
loses some of its purpose.
Mhm.
Um, and it's also not easy to depict it correctly to give Shelley that weight. Like
Mhm.
there's parts in the book where like Shelley is trying to tell him to stop, or there's parts of it where the ghost is trying to tell him that he's hurting himself and stuff like that. And those also add to it because it's like this weird version of death talking to him. And then there are other parts where it's just his flat out memory, and
Yeah.
he is literally like crying about it when the screen comes back to his character and things like that. It's become a very easy trope to show the pain that the whoever the person is alive is going through,
Mhm.
but without showing all of the other parts and giving that person that three-dimensional weight. It really just becomes like an early '80s action flick kind of story. And
Yeah.
you have a great point there where it she does have that,
Mhm.
even though it's through his eyes, because
Mhm.
all that art about her is definitely like through his eyes. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing imperfect about her all the way through it. It's definitely like that.
Yeah.
Um, it but it still kind of gave you more of who she was inside of it. And
Yeah.
some of that's like in the other crows, when they were trying to duplicate that, some of them hit that really well. Some
Mhm.
of them did not. Like there's one about a woman who she had an unborn child with her when she was killed, and when she comes
Wow.
back, it's a bunch of rage that she never got the choice to decide what she wanted to do.
Mm.
That
Mhm.
she didn't understand if she wanted to be a mother. She didn't ever got to process it because she barely found out before she got killed.
Mhm.
And that story tries to go off of that route, but it didn't carry the same weight. I didn't,
Yeah.
quite get it. There's
Mhm.
Poppy Z Bright's version where she's got this brother and sister that are a little bit more difficult to understand because it's all centered in New Orleans, and they're just way more complicated characters, and it's not always easy to get that same weight.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. It's tricky to do when the character is already dead. Like, if the
Yeah,
story had started earlier and we'd gotten to see more of Eric and Shelley's relationship before they were killed, then obviously Shelley would it would be a lot easier to make Shelley feel like more of a real character, but that would be the wrong place to start this particular story, I think.
yeah,
Um,
he really pulled that in the middle of the story when he showed,
Yeah.
like, the night they got, engaged,
Mhm.
and it shows, like, how they would interact with each other when they were trying to rebuild that old jalopy of a house,
Yeah.
and he put them all in the middle so that you get engaged with these feelings that Eric has, and you
Mhm.
see these shadows of his memory of her, which are done in that very light watercolor style where everything is all, perfect and meant to
Mhm.
be as beautiful as possible. And then you'd get a more realistic style when they're interacting and he's showing the actual memories.
Mm,
Um,
yeah, that's true.
I think that visual change in the styles was one of the ways that he was able to give a different level of gravity to the
Mhm.
different portions of it, which I think helped in expressing um, that three-dimensional version of
Yeah.
her. And I don't
Mhm.
even, oh my goodness, like trying to pull that off as a writer,
It's hard.
like, yeah, yeah, like
Mhm.
that's not the kind of, I'm not even sure, like there's a, I'm not even sure how I would want to pull that
Yeah.
off the top of my head. Like
Mhm.
that's definitely got gravity to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is sort of like through his eyes and idealized, but he does it in a way I think there's just so much emotion in it that it still feels real. It doesn't feel like it is his kind of idealized version of Shelley, his memories, but it doesn't really feel like that. Totally, like she still feels real and it still has that weight of
Yeah,
yeah, of just that this was something real between both of them, I guess.
yeah, and maybe that's where all that gravity comes from.
Mhm.
James O'Barr, the couple times I've met him, one of the times he was talking to me, I got this sketch from him that was beautiful, and it was Shelley dressed in a wedding dress as with the
Oh,
girl makeup on, because he keeps talking about
wow. That's cool.
doing another story where she comes back, and he's
That would
never
be
done it.
exciting. Ah, you should do it.
I would love to see it, but he's never done it. Uh, if I ever run into him at a con again, I'll ask him, but I like that concept, I think would also kind of help you understand things maybe from her eyes,
Yeah,
and that might be like a very interesting follow-up. I would enjoy seeing that.
yeah. No, I'm really excited for that. That has to happen.
I wish it was already done.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this has been great. Was there anything else you wanted to chat about?
No, ma'am. I'm excited for my campaigns. Talking to you, I'm
Yeah.
excited for your campaigns.
Oh, thanks.
I love being a part of Kickstarter and crowdfunding because it's
Hmm.
this, without the gatekeeping, and because there's a space for
Yeah.
publishers, and I read plenty of different published works. But being a part of the community that tries to create things from scratch is really important to me.
Hmm.
And I love being a part of it. I try to support the other books when I can. I've got like another scatter comics friend of mine just finished Doctor Dream through
Oh,
crowdfunding
wow.
yesterday. That's Keith Carmona. There's other guys that are part of Scattered that are developing books all the time, like Jason Duby and Nosferatu. There's a lot of guys I work with at Orange Cone that are always making stuff like Travis Gibb. Um,
Hmm.
I've got, you know, I've got a lot of different friends that are all a part of that community, whether it's Instinct Comics or Fried Comics. There's a lot going on,
Yeah.
and I think that the more people are a part of that, the more
Hmm.
flourishing that community gets, and I love being a part of it.
I agree. I think it's what you were saying at the beginning that it's if you're gonna make indie comics, it kind of has to be you have to have the passion for it. And I feel like the creators I know and the groups that I'm in, that really has been the case.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think I'd trade those experiences for anything in the world right now.
Yeah, same. Well, yeah, this is great. And the link to the campaign will be in the notes.
Mhm.
And yeah, thanks for being here. This was awesome.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate getting a chance to talk about this stuff as well. I honestly, I love talking about the books that inspire me, and I love talking about the books I'm working on. If I didn't have the fact that I had a day job, I'd probably never shut up about it.
Me too.
So thank you so
Agreed.
much for that opportunity.
Oh, thanks for being here.
Yes, ma'am.